Okay, morning everyone. Now I know we're here to talk about the future of the book, but I'm a historian, so I know nothing about the future. I'd say I barely even know about the present. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to talk to you about the past. In particular, I'm going to talk to you about the past of Christianity. I'm going to talk to you about Christian history. Now, I know a little bit about Christian history because I was the child of a monk and a nun. A not very good monk and a nun. I think there's definitely some unprocessed trauma in there somewhere. And as the child of a monk and a nun, you're brought up believing in certain things. You're brought up believing in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, forgiveness of sins, resurrection of the body, socks and sandals, completely normal thing to wear in summer. I don't pretend to have understood everything my parents told me. For quite a long time as a small child, I thought that God was called Peter, because at intervals throughout Mass, we seemed to me to be saying, "Thanks, Peter God." And I also knew something about Christian history, and what I knew about Christian history was that it had been like this. This is a film called Quo Vadis. We used to watch it at Christmas with sandwiches. It involves Christians being eaten to death by lions. There are some strange things about being brought up by a former monk and a nun. But basically, the Christian history I believed in was this. So nasty, brutish Romans, almost always played by Peter Ustinov. Here he is. What a brute. And poor, persecuted Christians, wearing white, being eaten by lions. Poor them. And I knew that the Romans had been in the wrong and that the Christians had been in the right. And I also knew, because this is what my parents told me, because this is what they believed, that when Jesus arrived, look, here he is, the Romans were delighted to see him. Not the bad Romans, the good Romans. Because who wouldn't be delighted to see him? This long-haired, bearded, gentle healer who healed the blind, cured the lame, and even raised the dead. And I also knew that this was something unique. This was something the Romans had never seen before. Because in my defense, this is what historians said. So there's a famous historian called Edward Gibbon who wrote what one English kings are famously intellectual, called Another Big Fat Book. And Edward Gibbon said that when the Romans saw Jesus, they saw in him something they had never seen before. They hadn't believed in their own gods, weird, many deities. They hadn't believed in philandering Zeus, jealous Hera, Apollo, none of that. It was only when Jesus arrived that they finally had a real revelation fitting to inspire the most rational esteem and conviction. In Jesus, another historian wrote, people saw something that they had never seen before. So imagine my surprise to find out about this chap. This is a long-haired, bearded healer. He was born in the east of the Roman Empire in around the year 0 AD, maybe a few years before, maybe a couple of decades after. When his mother was pregnant with him, she received a sign from the heavens. A divine being appeared to her and said, "You are pregnant with a child, and it is the child of a god." And when he was born, the heavens seemed to acclaim this because above the place where he was born, a lightning bolt appeared and didn't move on the day of his birth. Later, as he grew, people said he wasn't just the son of a god, he was a god himself. He did remarkable things, you might be able to guess. He healed the blind, cured the lame, even raised the dead, so it was said. And then the Romans got so annoyed by him, they put him on trial, and if he had died, the punishment would be death. And his friends, they called them disciples, it's a Greek word, discipulos, begged him not to go. They said, "Please don't go to the trial, they will kill you." And one of them said, "Will we see you again?" And he said, "Alive?" And they said, "Yes." And he said, "To my way of thinking, alive, but to yours, risen from the dead." So what's happening? Why is what I had read so different from what the Romans were writing? Well, to really understand what went on in the time when the Christians appeared in the Roman Empire, it's best to turn to another classical figure. Some of you might recognize him. This is the mother of Brian in the Monty Python film, The Life of Brian. Now, if you've seen this film, you'll know that right here, she, is saying, he's not the Messiah. He's just a very naughty boy. So the shtick with the life of Brian, I don't know if you've seen it, but basically somebody is born in the stable next to Jesus, and by accident he sort of gets mistaken for Jesus, and then everyone thinks he's Jesus, and the wise men come, and blah, blah, blah. It goes on like that, with jokes. This film, when it came out in the 1970s, that late, was so scandalous it was banned in Ireland, of course, but even in parts of Britain. It was banned in Norway, and then it was marketed in Sweden with the slogan, "So funny it was banned in Norway." But it contained within itself a really, really dangerous idea. Because the important thing about Christianity was that Jesus was the one, the only, the person who had come and ended what Christians called, they started this term, the Dark Ages, the time when there was no spiritual enlightenment. And that is what we were all brought up to believe. It's what I was brought up to believe. It's what more or less 1,700 years of history told us to believe. But actually, if you go and read what the Romans say, that is not what they thought at all. So we're talking about the future of the book. To understand the future of the book, I'd ask you to read this book. So nobody reads this book now. You can kind of see the name there, but it's by somebody called Celsus. So he was writing in around 170 AD when Christianity was sort of getting going just about in the Roman Empire. And when he heard the stories of Jesus, what he said was, why do we believe this? Walk into the marketplace in the east of the Roman Empire, he said, and there are any number of men who will blow away diseases, heal the blind, cure the sick, and for a few obels, maybe even they will raise the dead. And they all have the same spiel, these so-called prophets, he said, these prophets, these charlatans, these moneymakers. Oh, believe in me, he said, if you want to be saved, because the world is about to end. And you are going to perish, but you who believe in me, you will be saved from your iniquities. And I will come again, and we will live forever. And he said, it's so confusing, Celsus said. He said, how on earth are we supposed to know which savior to believe? If this one says that the world is ending and you have to believe in me, and if this one says, oh, the world is ending and you have to believe in me, and so does that one, who do we know how to believe? Do we have to throw dice? And he said other things too, Celsus. I still remember where I was when I first read him. I was sitting in the British Library. It was an autumn afternoon, a bit after September. The lights were coming on above the desks. And on the yellowing page, when you read Celsus, he is to this day a not very fashionable author. I read things that were so shocking, so surprising, so frankly funny, I wanted to tap the person on the shoulder next to me and say, look, did you know this? I didn't do that. Nobody thanks you for that in the British Library. But it was a revelation to me. And he didn't stop there, Celsus. He also went on, he attacked the idea of Garden of Eden, very silly. God can't be that omniscient if he didn't know that they were going to sin. He attacks the idea of creation. Tell me, he says, if you have an omnipotent God, why does he take 7 days to make the earth? Why doesn't he make it in one big go? Boom, and then be done with it. Why does he piece it out bit by bit by bit? And then he says, and this is so Roman, and why on his last day does he have a rest exactly like a bad builder? Get the sense that you don't want to work for a Roman if you're a builder. And he had other things too. Why did God go for Mary? He was God. He could have anyone. He could have literally any woman on the planet. Why would he have gone for her? If God has come to send Jesus to save people, why did he send him somewhere so small and quiet? Why not send him to Rome, save more people more quickly, get the message out? And then he said, and if only those who know Jesus are saved, then why did God wait so long to save him? Why send him only then? What about all the millions of thousands of people who've lived and died before Jesus? Why didn't God send him earlier? Did he forget? So what really happened? Well, to understand what happened, you need to look at this picture. And to understand books, actually, you need to look at this picture. So we call this period, to this day, the triumph of Christianity. That's the word that they use in history books, the triumph of Christianity. You need to watch that word, because what a triumph is not another word for a nice thing. That's how we use it. In the Roman times, The triumph was a very precise term for a thoroughgoing military victory. A triumph would be celebrated against an enemy whose soldiers had been defeated, whose captains had been humiliated, whose possessions had been destroyed. A triumph was not a nice thing. It was an annihilation. And this painting in the Vatican, it's called The Triumph of Christianity, shows that. It knew that. So there's a classical statue on the floor, the cross has been raised. So what you have to think when you're reading is you're not getting the whole story. You're getting a story. And in Christianity, it's a perfect example of us getting a story. What happened after the Christians came to power in the Roman Empire? Well, it's often said that the Christians were persecuted by the Romans. A famous Oxford scholar suggested instead that the Roman persecution of the Christians had been too little, too late. If you don't believe that, I'm not suggesting we should persecute Christians, but it's interesting. Today there are 2 billion Christians in the world. There is not one single true pagan. Who was persecuting who? 10 years after Christianity came to power, laws started to appear against pagans. By 341 AD, 30 years after Christianity had started to gain power, a law was published which said, all superstition must cease. Anyone who enters a pagan temple will be struck down by an avenging sword. Temples started to suffer. Statues started to be desecrated. Books started to be burned in piles. A philosopher was taken from her carriage in Alexandria. She was flayed alive. Because the Christians thought that the symbols that she was using, she was a mathematician, they thought that they were symbols of Satan, and they said that she was a demon. You might not know about this destruction that Christianity wrought on the ancient books and thoughts and ideals of the classical world, but you've seen it. If you've been to the British Museum in London, there are these statues. We have quite a lot of fights about these statues. They used to be called the Elgin Marbles. They're from the Parthenon in Athens. Now, most people think when they see these, they notice that they've got no heads, no hands, they're defaced. People assume that this was Elgin's doing. Maybe he broke them when he took them off. Not at all implausible. He was pretty clumsy. Or they think that maybe it's just time. It is not just time. I went around the British Museum with the head of Greece and Rome, and he said, it is not accidental. Your head doesn't get accidentally knocked off if you're 30 feet up in the air. This is the work of Christians, who, when they came to power, attacked Greek and Roman temples with chisels, iron bars, their hands and feet if they could, and they beheaded statues because they thought they were demonic, because they didn't like the ancient world, and they didn't like its ideas, and they didn't like its gods. Go into museums, you might see statues with crosses carved in their forehead. They baptized them, they cut the noses off, they cut the nipples off. They particularly attacked statues of Aphrodite, which they didn't like either. And in this period as well, another idea arose, an idea of heresy. So heresy is a word we know today, and it makes us think of things like this. The person in the flames there is Thomas Cranmer, not having a very nice time. Heresy is a word with a long history, but it's actually got a longer history than we remember. Because heresy comes from a Greek word, hieresis, which simply means choice. People have read ancient Greek texts to see if there is anything bad about choice in the ancient Greek world, and there isn't. In the ancient Greek world, heresy, hieresis, was considered a great thing. To choose what you read and thought and did with the power of your own mind and your own intellect was considered one of the best things a man could do. It was with the coming of Christianity, heresy started to be seen as a sin. Not just as a sin. It was evil, it was wicked, it was a snake, it was a serpent, it was a polluting contagion, it was a gangrene that had to be cut out. It was, in the words of St. Augustine, heretics, in the words of St. Augustine, always a man with an enviable mastery of metaphor, was shit that is voided from the Catholic Church. So why am I telling you about this? Apart from that, it's kind of interesting. Because we're reading today and we're thinking about books and we're thinking about the future of books. And we talk a lot about echo chambers. Think of this as the original and one of the most powerful echo chambers that ever was. For a millennium at least, Christianity took over Europe and took over what it thought and read and saw. And the really frightening thing about the books that I've talked about here, it's not that they were destroyed. They still existed, but nobody read them. And when they read them, they didn't believe them or they weren't interested in them. When I read these books, I took them out of the library. They were on crumbling yellow pages. They were so unfashionable, lots of them. So my plea is, don't let the chambers happen. Read books, read your books, but read their books too. Read all books. No book, someone once said, is so bad that you won't get some good from it. Possibly true, possibly not, but it might be interesting nonetheless. And I'd like to leave the last words with this chap. Again, if you know Greek, you can probably see his name at the bottom. He's Herodotus, historian. Very broad-minded, actually, an original liberal. And he said, in the 5th century, he said, if you gathered all the people of the world together and you said to them, whose religions, whose customs are the best, the people of the world would think very, very carefully. And they would consider it, and they'd discuss it, and then they'd say, mine. We haven't changed so much. So how are you liberal? Well, be more like Herodotus and less like the Christians. Speak to them, read them, listen to them. Because in the end, we're all after the same things. Actually, I won't leave the last word with Herodotus. I'll leave it with another ancient writer who fought against the Christians when the Christians were trying to shut down paganism and close off things in Rome to pagans. And he made an impassioned plea, and he wrote a letter, and he said, we see the same sky, the same stars. We see the same stars. The same sky is shared by all. What does it matter what route we use to seek the truth? Thank you.